Hello, hello, Megan Thompson, Megan Thompson Coaching. And today we're going to talk about how parents of highly sensitive kids have broken the meltdown cycle, broken out of that shutdown cycle, and 5 separate lessons that we've learned after coaching hundreds of families out of this pattern. So let's dive in. The first thing that we're going to be learning today and talking about in dealing with those meltdowns, if your kid is hitting, kicking, screaming, shutting down, if they're a teenager, just constantly, doors closed, they won't tell you what's going on, and they're not following through on any expectations, whether that be for school or with friends, not leaving the house, then this video is for you, because we're here to talk about how parents break out of this cycle for their sensitive child. And there are 5 certain things that we've learned over the years that are consistent, regardless of how your child is showing up. Those meltdowns might be internal. They might be saying things like, I'm a bad kid, I'm the worst in the world, I can't believe that I'm here, you'd be better off without me. Those meltdowns might be external. Your kid is hitting, kicking, screaming, as I mentioned before. Or if your teenager is the one that you're watching this video about, or one that you're listening in about, the behavior is more likely that they're shutting down, right? And they're refusing to do whatever it is that you need them to do. All of those circumstances, if your child's highly sensitive, there are 5 themes that we've been seeing over the years that are tried and true. So let's pay attention to how parents break out of this cycle and what it takes, right? What it takes to break out of this and what we've learned. So first thing first, right? Your opinion of what's possible for your child is the single most important factor in breaking out of this meltdown cycle. I want to speak about this for quite some time, because many parents who speak with us, or we see them posting online, or they're in our Facebook group, they're asking questions, the vision that they have of what's possible for their child is critical in identifying whether or not they're going to break out of that pattern, right? So when you see researchers who have been able to identify a cause for a pattern, right, or a prognosis, right, a doctor might be able to identify all of the challenges in a certain diagnosis and then give you a prognosis. How long is this going to last for you? How long the treatment might take, and then what your odds are of reaching that milestone of eliminating the disease, right? So when we think about parenting a highly sensitive child or teen stuck in that meltdown or shutdown cycle, there are certain prognoses that we've been able to notice. What are the odds of parents breaking out of this cycle? And I hate to put it that way, but it really does feel, quite for you especially, like it's a vicious cycle, right? It's a vicious cycle that can feel like a disease, and I don't want to liken it all the way down that rabbit hole of the metaphor here, but I don't think there's any other way to put it, because the disease that's stuck is the picture that you're painting for what's possible for your child, and that can be contagious, right? It can be contagious, especially if you're in a 2-parent household, or you hear from other people that your child will never amount to the skills that you're trying to teach them to build. So let's think about this. If your child is hitting on a daily basis, throwing their body on the floor, and they're ripping toys out of their siblings' hands at 4, 5, 6, even 9 years old, you can start to believe that your child will never stop that behavior. And what happens? Your automatic thought goes straight to people who take things out of other people's hands when they're adults. Where do they end up, right? Jail, or they're unsuccessful if they can't get what they want when they want it, and they go after it with force, right? Those are people who are hurting, not just emotionally, but also hurting other people physically. And that leads to a completely wide picture of how they won't be successful in their future, right? But if that's what you're envisioning for your child, then, and you're focused on that so much that your worries are perpetuating that belief, and you're consistently worried day in and day out that that's what's happening and what's going to happen, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And there's a tipping point that we've noticed for parents, where some parents might think that their child could beat the odds of that, right? They might think that their child is capable of reaching their dreams, but on a day-to-day basis, they're acting like their child will never, ever get out of this cycle. And so what happens is that when their child is doing what they need them to do and showing signs of improvement and progress, they miss it, okay? So why is that? Your brain, when you're stuck in that hyper focus, it has tunnel vision on what's not working. And without clear and specific systems to be able to break out of that tunnel vision, you can't read the label from the inside of your own bottle if you're stuck in that bottle of perceiving that your child is stuck. And this is a pretty clear symptom of survival mode. You've heard me probably say this before. Parents who are stuck get tunnel vision, and all you can deal with is the day-to-day. And when you're stuck in that day-to-day, it's very, very hard to dream, because people who are stuck in survival mode and who are dealing with daily meltdowns day in and day out don't have time to dream, right? You're fried dealing with these daily meltdowns. And that experience shrinks your comfort zone even more. And so you actually end up, and we see this happen, where parents end up tipping the scale towards changing their expectations for their child. And when you do that, when you change what's possible for your child and it moves towards deciding that your child will never amount to the dreams you had for them when you started planning for children and raising your child when they were younger, that is a very, very hard hump to get back over on the other side. And so I want to speak about that, because if you're at that cusp when you're starting to feel like your child cannot become successful, let's think about the definition of that success, right? It means that they're having healthy relationships, both with their peers. A successful adult is able to communicate their needs, is able to accept reality when things don't work out well for them, is able to advocate for their needs, is able to talk to other peers and tell them that their behavior isn't working out for them and they need to work together. A successful adult is capable of compromise, right? And a successful adult is financially independent, right? And has a career path that they're proud of and that they think they can do. They feel capable of reaching that career path, right? So when we look at all of those factors, and you, in your perception of what's available for your child, doesn't see and feel certain that your child can reach those goals by the time they're 21, 22, 23, 24, and be clear on that path where you're seeing that evidence when your child is 8, 9, 10, and 14 and up, right? Then this is really important to pay attention to right now, because that challenge that you're having is the single most biggest factor. Can you hear me? Oh, there's so many important pieces around how important this is that my grammar has gone out the window. And I can't implore you to focus on this more, because what happens when you're not paying attention to where you know your child can go, or if you've been dealing with the meltdown and shutdown cycle so long that you've adjusted your expectations and those expectations have shrunken, then your child is not going to be able to move beyond your expectations. Think about this. Why? Why is this? Highly sensitive kids are already a minority. They're already beating the odds by being 20% of the population, right? So they already have to combat the perception of who they should be from the other 80% of the population. And then at home, when the parenting environment also keeps them stuck and small, just by nature of how their parents think they're capable, then that is an extra layer of challenge. And when you add those layers on top of layers, and the knowing for sure that parents are the single most important factor, and the relationship with parents is the single most important factor on whether or not children will end that meltdown cycle, then it's critically important that you pay attention to that self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if you're not able to believe with certainty that your child will change their behavior, and you know that that's not because you're delusionally optimistic, right? You have a system, you have a plan, you've seen something working, you've been following the progress, you've been tracking the data and knowing that your child is making progress, and you see that consistently, then your child will not be able to move out of that meltdown cycle. You'll see it maybe in phases, if anything, if you ever stop it. Okay. So again, we've been working, as I mentioned before at the beginning, you see this in the title of what we're talking about here. We've worked with hundreds of families at this point, both in the private practice and here in the coaching company. And that's a data point that you can't deny, right? This is not anecdotal research. This is not anecdotal idea of a single person working with, a couple of people every year, right? Hundreds of people over the last decade, and specifically even in the last 3 to 5 years, even more so as we've grown. So it's important to understand that those data points are current and thorough. And so then when we look at the next piece, right? So that perspective, right? Your perspective of whether or not your child is capable of reaching their dreams, super, super critical. Secondly, though, number 2, right? Traditional parenting keeps highly sensitive children and teens stuck in the meltdown cycle. Okay. So why is that? What is traditional parenting first? Let's break it down. Traditional parenting is shame-based parenting. Traditional parenting is teaching your child that they are a bad kid or that they are doing bad things when their behavior is ineffective. Okay? And so how do we do that? We teach them that by giving them a reward for good behavior, like sticker charts, or we teach that by giving them timeouts and removing the parent-child relationship and sending them to their room, even locking them in the room or holding the door if they're in that room because they want to leave, they want to be connected to you, and you're trying to shun that connection by teaching them that their behavior is not effective. And the way that you're trying to teach them is a more traditional way to teach them, when in reality it's a punishment. Other punishments like removing access to toys, access to screens, and as a direct result of your child's behavior, with the expectation that removing access to a favorite item will teach your child to earn it back. Okay, so anything that teaches your child to change their behavior based on something that's done outside of themselves. So stickers, tokens, money, reward charts, privilege of getting access to a screen or access to a friend's time, or access to favorable toys, right? All of those are things outside of your child that you're using to control your child's behavior, to try to teach your child to behave differently. This is all a traditional and outdated perspective of how children learn. Not only is it outdated, it's ineffective. It doesn't actually match the research that children learn through play, not through lecture or removal of items. Children don't learn that way. So what you're doing is you're treating your child like a dog, giving them a treat when they do something you want, not giving them the treat when they do something that you don't want. And, to the extreme, removing favored items or needs, or connection with you, which is a need, right? To quote unquote teach them that their behavior is not effective. So I want to acknowledge that this perspective is a highly perpetuated myth. This plan, this use of parenting is pervasive. It is constant. It is consistent in our Western culture, and in the United States, and in Australia, and in the UK, in first world countries, and in a fair amount of first world countries, I should say. And so you might have heard this from your kid's pediatrician. You might have heard this from your kid's therapist. You might have heard this from your kid's teacher or principal. Or you might have just been using the same kind of strategies that your parents used to raise you to change your behavior. And what's really, really critical to be clear is that when your child is when you're using those methods to teach your child doesn't learn how to change their behavior. Instead, they learn that you're mad at them, and they start to believe, and they start to perceive that they are bad people. And no child is inherently bad. No child was put on this earth to be miserable. Every child was put on this earth to experience love, care, and the certainty that life is possible for them. Everything in life is possible for them. And if you believe that, but you try to teach your child by removing things, including you in your access, then that actually defies your own logic, right? So you want to pay attention to that, because parents who are using the traditional parenting strategies don't end up ending the meltdown cycle. And I'm going to say this definitively, because you might see the meltdowns stop, but the internal meltdowns persist. The leaked out behavior, like hitting and sneaky behavior, persists. And the shutdown behavior and the closed off behavior persists, continues, right? So it's very, very important to notice when you're using traditional parenting strategies, what is your definition of what's working? What's working, okay? It also teaches highly sensitive kids not only that they are bad and wrong, but it also teaches them to escape their reality. Now, highly sensitive kids who have a high likelihood of dipping into their imagination already, right? Then when you teach them to dip into their imagination to find happiness and to escape their pain and their frustration, they end up checking out from their relationship with you. Now, why is this so important? Research demonstrates for over a decade, over 100 years, that children who are highly sensitive, who experience big feelings, who notice their small details, who pay attention to the little things more than the average Joe, highly sensitive children, highly sensitive teens, change through their relationship with their parents. Now, if your parenting strategy is to remove connection with you in order to change your child, then you end up going against what works for highly sensitive kids. It's really, really important that you're not using data that traditional parenting makes non-highly sensitive kids turn out, quote unquote, okay, to dictate, to decide how you're going to change your highly sensitive child's behavior, right? This isn't a phase. Your child has a personality trait that has been found in over 100 different species. So species, right? And animals, dogs, cats, rhesus monkeys, fruit flies, to name a few, horses. And so when we notice that, then it's really, really important to use that science, that scientific data, to change your opinion, which is not based in fact and data, okay? And even if your opinion supports how you were raised, it's important to educate yourself, and it's important to decide to change your mind because what you're doing isn't working. And so when we see parents and our clients who come into our program with this belief, the important, with this belief that their child needs to learn through punishment, as soon as they change their mind, that's how children need to learn, is the very door that unlocks how successful they are in our work together, the timeline of how successful they are in our work together. So I want to speak about this because in our coaching program, our success rate is 98.9. I always mix those numbers up. 98.9% success rate. And so what that means is that everybody who does the work and who believes the work will work makes it happen, and they eliminate that meltdown cycle. So the length of time that it takes a certain family is contingent on a number of different factors, to include your particular child, But we see that success that they eliminate in our 10 weeks at that rate. That number is specific in our 10-week program. So noticing that and breaking that meltdown cycle, having at least your first meltdown-free day, but many, countless parents that we work with have way more than that. But that's our threshold. And so when we think about identifying the acknowledgement, parents who are dealing with 20 meltdowns a day have a meltdown-free day, that's a huge accomplishment, right? So we want to pay attention to that, those outliers on the bell curve when we look at the progress rate that we see for our families and how everybody gets that result. And noticing that for what we see, and when we speak about this, and I know I went a little bit in terms of using our clients as evidence, but this is what we learned, right? We've learned it by helping our clients get this result, right? So the next piece is identifying those symptoms. So I'm going to go back to this. The symptoms that your child has to escape reality. If your child is escaping reality, they're going to start to show you that behavior. And what happens? That behavior looks like a misdiagnosis of ADHD, right? A spacey kid who's locked in their own little world because they're shut down ends up with a diagnosis from somebody who doesn't know highly sensitive kids and doesn't understand how to break the meltdown cycle and isn't providing you with the parenting support you need to shift that meltdown cycle yourself with your child. They might diagnose your kid with an attention deficit and attentive disorder. And with that being the highlight, right? An attentive type of ADHD. And the next piece is noticing that for highly sensitive kids who are stuck in their own little world and unable to communicate their needs, they start to shut down and they might be diagnosed with depression or anxiety without paying attention to the trait and noticing what the cause is, right? Because a mental health need that is being treated in the traditional mental health support system is typically looking at biology and not taking into account biology from a standpoint of personality, but rather as a deficit. When your child is highly sensitive, they are not broken. They do not have a deficit. They have a skill gap, right? They don't have a biological deficit. It is a strength to be highly sensitive. And for sensitive kids with skills, they can decide to make it their superpower. So spacey kids, right? They can be misdiagnosed with an ADHD diagnosis. And those highly sensitive kids who are not, who have a very thorough imagination can go so far as to expect things to come out the way that they want them to in their imagination. And that can even add to the blow-ups, right? Because if your child is focused internally and not listening or not hearing what you have to say about what to expect in the next event, like say, for example, they're going to grandma's house and you told them that Uncle Johnny isn't going to be there and they expect Uncle Johnny because Uncle Johnny's always at grandma's house, but Uncle Johnny happens to have a plan, and Uncle Johnny's their favorite grandparent. Sorry, Uncle Johnny's their favorite uncle, and they always get to play with Uncle Johnny when you go to grandma's, and they create a story in their mind about how Uncle Johnny is going to be there and what they're going to get to do with Uncle Johnny, and then they get to grandma's house, and Uncle Johnny's not there, and what happens? Crash. Meltdown City, right? Meltdown City. Or refusal to get out of the car when they don't see Uncle Johnny's car, right? And this example can be played out in adolescence, right? We could see teenagers who have an expectation of how their day is going to go. They are not talking to you about how their day, what's expected in their day, and then you say, hey, you have this, this science fair that's we're all going to go to because your younger sister's in it. And they had a plan of how their day was going to go, and then and that doesn't work out. And what happens? They shut down. They refuse, right? So there's all sorts of ways to look at how this plays out for your particular family. And I don't want us to get trapped in the details. I want you to notice that your child is getting stuck in expectations, because they're in their imagination, they're not able to be present in the moment. Now, an imagination is a huge skill, right? We want children to have an imagination, and we want them to be able to notice the difference between their imagination and their reality. That's a big skill for children to learn in order to manage their emotions and in order to see what's possible for them and act on it, right? In any given situation. It's also a really critical skill for sensitive kids to build in order to roll with the punches of day-to-day life, right? And rather than giving out the punches, right? And so that's really, really important. And so when that happens, you might end up with a misdiagnosis of pathological demand avoidance, which is a new fad determination that can be placed along the autism spectrum for professionals who are not clear on the highly sensitive child who is quick to say no. And so it's a different category that professionals have started to use when in reality they're not paying attention to the 100 years worth of research on highly sensitive people. So they came up with a new idea to just identify this as a symptom, right? So that's a different one. You want to go listen to my other talks on psychological evaluations and diagnoses to hear more about that stuff. But for now, we want to speak about the fact that you can be stuck in that meltdown cycle, because then when you access traditional parenting, and then that takes you down the road of needing traditional support, and the therapist is not aware of the sensitive trait, then you end up staying stuck in that cycle, because traditional mental health therapy doesn't work for many reasons for highly sensitive kids. You aren't eliminating the meltdowns and the symptoms. You might be reducing the presentation of that symptom or changing the presentation of that symptom. Or you might not. Your kid might shut down and just not attend the appointment at all. So when we think about the challenges that we see parents of sensitive kids, we want to move on to the third lesson that we've learned, right? The third lesson that we know to be true in helping hundreds of parents break out of the meltdown cycle and shutdown cycle is that parents who focus more on their child's potential and aren't zeroing in and hyper-focused on their child's defects, if you will, those are the parents that end up eliminating that meltdown cycle the fastest, okay? So if you're able to see a light at the end of the tunnel and envision that clearly, then you're much more likely to break out of that cycle. And we see our clients do that in typically under 6 weeks. And what I mean by that is that, as many of you might have known, our program is 10 weeks long, but we start to see that progress mid-program, timeline of that. And so we see that because when we think about being able to shift that dynamic and noticing that, we capitalize on the research, right? We always do that. So let's look at this. Okay, I want to show for those who are watching today, and this being a video, the piece that I want to identify here is this image that describes Vantage Sensitivity. So scientifically, highly sensitive kids have a sensitivity to how they see the world based on their vantage point, based on the environment and what impact their environment has on their behavior is indicative, or demonstrates that your child will change their behavior and actually surpass the average Joe in their behavior, in their potential, in their intellect, and in their academic success, as well as in their physical health, when the parent-child relationship is positive. When your home environment is positive, your child will actually surpass the average Joe in those factors, the average kiddo, okay, the non-highly sensitive child. So what that means is if you see that your child has intellectual gifts or creative talents, and you notice that potential, and then you see that that is a spark, a sign that your child is capable of much more than what they're showing you now, being stuck in the meltdown cycle. And you use that to identify that you need to follow a system and plan and be strategic about teaching your child the skills that they need to learn, and that needs to come through your relationship with them to break out of that meltdown cycle. And you're strategic with that, then you are much more capable of swiftly breaking out of that meltdown cycle. Now, this is really, really important because we speak to parents all the time who have been trying to break out of the meltdown cycle for years. You've been trying by reading books. You've read books on attachment. You've read books on how to get kids to talk. You've read books on how to playfully engage. You've read maybe you've done other parenting programs that teach you how to positively parent. You might have taken classes locally or worked with a therapist. And if the relationship with your child is not the forefront of that work, it is very, very likely that you have taken a much longer time to solve this problem than you need to. And that's critically important because it actually adds to your beliefs that this is going to take forever, that you have plenty of time, and that this is a journey in the sense that your journey is going to be long, and it's inevitable that it has to be long. Because when you have all of these proofs, if you will, that programs or books or professional support in a different way has led to partial results or has made it harder for you to see the results or progress, then your brain's going to start to tell you that you just have a kid whose journey is going to take longer than everybody else's kid. And the problem with that is that it doesn't take into account what the research and what our experience actually speaks about. Because when we see, and it actually breeds skepticism for you when you hear the results that we get our clients, right? And that's really, really important, because when you're paying attention to that skepticism and you're thinking that that skepticism has so much proof based on other parenting solutions, then you're not noticing that your child is in a window of a bell curve where they either are going to fall into the negative end of the spectrum, the negative end of the bell curve. So we think about a bell curve being the size of a hill, right? The shape of a hill. People who are in the average, most people are in the average middle of that curve, and the average people, the outliers, if you will, the minority, highly sensitive people, are on either end of that bell curve. So say just to keep things clean, we've got 10% of highly sensitive kids on the negative end of the spectrum, where they are just completely consumed by their big emotions, and they are stuck and struggling, and their daily meltdowns have led to suicidal thoughts. Their daily shutdowns have led to refusal, and their world has shrunken because they don't know what's possible, and they don't think that they can do it. And then the other 10% of sensitive kids is on the other end, where they're thriving, and they are the creators, they are the dancers, they are the gifted kids and showing up in academics. And the single most important factor is the relationship with their parents. And this is so important, because if your kid is also demonstrating symptoms that are physical, like asthma, right, upper respiratory difficulties for highly sensitive kids show up when the parent-child relationship is struggling. And immune system support is much higher on the bell curve, and highly sensitive kids are much more physically healthier when their parent-child relationship is clear and consistent and positive. So if you see that's another sign, and that is Boyce's research. It's not my research. It's research that's been going on since the 90s. He takes from Lewis's research as well to speak to that. And so when we speak about the importance of understanding those facts, then what you thought was irrelevant to the fact that your kid's highly sensitive and just a completely different component is now becomes relevant when we look at the fact that being highly sensitive affects your nervous system. It's a key trait that's impacts your the way that your brain responds to stress, and the way that your body responds to stress, the way that your nerves respond to stress. And it impacts the whole physical being of a highly sensitive child. And that plays out in how your child physically expresses their emotions, right? Hitting, kicking, screaming, throwing their bodies on the floor, freaking out, as well as mentally and emotionally. And so that their physical health is not immune to that experience, right? It totally impacts your immune system. Right? This is why, your doctor will ask you how high your stress is when you're sick too, right? So what's important to understand is how this all connects to each other. And when we see this, we see that highly sensitive kids actually improve their odds and they go above and beyond average performance, average success rate, average quality of relationships are much higher performing for highly sensitive people when they are living in a positive environment. And that for children is contingent upon the parent-child relationship. It is deeply connected to the parent-child relationship. Okay, so obviously, right, your kid lives in your house. That's your job to impact the relationship and impact the environment. And that's great news. That's great news. It gives you so much power to change and to learn from these lessons, right? So what's our next lesson, right? The single hardest thing for sensitive parents to address is to stop taking responsibility for their child's emotions. Now, wait a minute, right? I just told you that you have all the power. You have a ton of power in how your child changes their world and how your child shows up in life and expresses their emotions and handles challenges and responds to homework demands and responds to teachers' requests, right? And responds to their peers and their friendships. Yes, that's true. And it's also true that without noticing that it is also partly your child's job as a sensitive parent, the fact that it weighs on you can hold you in overwhelm from taking action. And we see this with our clients. This is why we offer so much mindset support. When we see parents that we work with consistently struggle, it's usually because of that insurmountable pressure. And when you break out of that pressure, and we see our clients do that, just celebrating one of our clients, today, actually, in our mindset call. The days are blending. Who came in just consistently judging herself day in and day out, every little thing she second guessed. And moving through the program we just celebrated her today in her work, she has stopped telling herself that she's wrong for where she's at in her challenges and in her responses and in her decisions. So she has eliminated her automatic shame response. Now, you might hear, if you're a highly sensitive parent, from other adult highly sensitive coaches that highly sensitive people are more prone to shame. And shame tells you that you're wrong, who do you think you are, and that you're broken. And when you can break out of that automatic pattern of experiencing shame, then guess what? That shame doesn't need to be how you experience the world. That is simply a concession that professionals have decided because children who are highly sensitive made it to adulthood without learning this skill. And so now those adults are being judged as more highly likely to experience shame. When in reality, if you're taught how to break out of that pattern in childhood, you won't be an adult who's showing up to a coach or who's showing up to a therapist, dealing with the heavy, heavy weight of shame and guilt and fear that perpetuates your life. And great news is that that can change for you as an adult while you're working on shifting your child's beliefs and challenges and changing their meltdown cycle as well. And that's done through pretty significant hard work from your own psychology, your own, and how we support our clients is super important to pay attention to, because that method of noticing the fact that you're walking on eggshells day in and day out, right, is a sign that you're showing your kid that they're not capable, and you're not able to lead your child if you don't think that they're capable. There's a lot of factors that have you holding your breath on a daily basis if you're worried about how your child's going to respond or how your teen's going to respond. So you need support to break out of that. That's very, very hard to do on your own consistently, right? Because what happens is you end up muscling up. You know what? Today is enough. I'm gonna decide to stick to a limit, and just is what it is. And what happens is that when your child struggles, you end up staying in a pattern when your child struggles with that limit, like, it's bedtime is bedtime, that's it, right? You take that mentality and you decide that, the decision around bedtime is solid, it's valid, it's important for your kid to go to bed on time. And then you hold that perspective without the skills of how to teach your child to manage frustration and deal with disappointment. Then you end up invalidating your child, and you end up staying stuck. And that keeps you stuck in the position of feeling like believing in your own decisions as a parent isn't working, right? So you second guess yourself, and it's this vicious cycle. So you got to break out of that, and you need help to do that. That is not typically, and like I said, we've been working with hundreds of families at this point. And it's not typically something that people can break out of on their own. I have to bring it up with our work, and they all bring it up in our work together, and then they break out of it. So we see that in the milestones that our clients reach, and how we track that progress. So the next thing that I want to pay attention to here is noticing that if you're not sure how your child will react, how do you know how you'll react, right? It's very hard to decide how you're going to respond if you don't know, if your child is a wild card, if your child's behavior is a wild card, right? So that in turn becomes very, very difficult, especially as a sensitive parent who is trying to manage your own nervous system and your own emotional state at the same time. So the next thing that we see when we look at the lessons here, right? So lesson number 5, here we are at, right? We're at the top 5 lessons today. I'm sure there's more, but we're going to just stick with 5 today. Top 5 lessons that we see again and again over the last several decades. Over the last several years of over a decade for my work, and consistently for parents of sensitive kids around the world, or parents of sensitive kids around the world, the challenges that they have consistently. And so the number 5, right, our 5th lesson to cover today is the parents who help their children eliminate the meltdown cycle see themselves as active creators of their own opportunities. Okay, they have one thing in common, is that they see themselves as a decision maker. They see themselves as a problem fixer. They see themselves as a doer, but they also see themselves as capable of solving problems. So not just being a fixer in the sense that you know how to follow a proven system with a proven plan, and but they also have the capacity to know that they solve problems, And so that's, obviously one of the reasons that's leaving you so frustrated, because you are such a problem solver, right? And if you haven't been able to solve this problem, you can start to think this problem is insolvable. It's really, really important that you keep listening, because that's simply not true. Eliminate the daily meltdown cycle. Highly sensitive kids do not have to live a daily meltdown life. It is not developmentally appropriate. It's not appropriate for children's, regardless of their age, to be dealing with meltdowns on a daily basis. Even 2-year-olds who are struggling with meltdowns can have a meltdown-free day, right? That's totally normal and typical of sensitive kids. And so if you're being told that, even your youngest child, we've seen parents of 2-year-olds that we work with break out of that pattern and prevent those intense moments, even though your child is, struggling at that age. Just trying to wrap around what they're independent around, what they can be independent around, and the fact that you don't read their mind, right? And if your child is stuck in that pattern, they're over 2, they're over 4, they're over 6, right? And that age just keeps creeping up. Then it's really, really important that you're paying attention to noticing that parents of all walks of life who identify as people who beat the odds. You don't look at the average Joe to describe how your life is supposed to be, right? If you see yourself as somebody who is above average, more capable than the average person, then you are much more likely to break out of this meltdown cycle faster. Now, I'm not speaking about people who are, egotistical and arrogant, right? I'm talking about noticing that that you have a unique skill set, and being certain that you have a unique skill set and a unique capability of making things happen, right? So if you view yourself as somebody who makes things happen, you're going to be much more capable of breaking out of that meltdown cycle. And these are people who don't look to the norm of other people's opinions to define their own reality, right? Because the average parent of a highly sensitive kid is going to say all of what we just talked about, right? Those meltdowns are, eventually they'll grow out of it. The average parent of a highly sensitive kid is going to say, oh, yeah, I guess we just were dealt a really hard kid. The average parent is going to say, life is hard. Life is hard, and they're going to decide that, and they're not going to see that they can make life easy and in the sense that it can be simple to solve problems, and it can be simple to end the meltdown cycle. And so if you see yourself as somebody who was born to experience joy and focus on noticing that challenges can be opportunities, your odds of breaking out of that frustration, that aggravation are much higher. And we speak to our clients about this. I say often that you need to have that optimism, but hope is not a strategy, right? Boot camp is a strategy. I say that to our clients because that's the name of our program. But the focus is noticing that you can have all the hope of the world, but if you don't know what to do, when, and how to do it, then you won't be able to break out of that pattern, right? So let's talk about what actually works. What actually works is noticing, as I mentioned before, and we've spoken about a lot about this, right? Noticing that your relationship with your child is the single most important piece, and changing that, and what you see your child is capable of, changing that is critical, super important, number one importance in changing your child's life and breaking out of that meltdown cycle for your whole family. Secondly, is you need to be able to playfully communicate and enjoy the conversation around emotions. And you need to be confident in that. And your child needs to be confident in that. And your teen needs to be confident in that. Even teens can be playful about emotions. Can you believe it? It is absolutely something that's possible for you. And then you need to be able to help your child receive feedback consistently and move on from it. consistently move on from it. And what that means is that your child or your sensitive teen needs to be able to generalize the skills you teach them. They need to be able to take the skill that you teach them and then show that skill in different avenues of their life. At school, with their friends, at home with you, right? That's what generalize means. You see it in different avenues of life. And then next, and lastly, is that you need support. You need to be able to have someone who has proven the system over and over and over again. You need that certainty, right? Because if you haven't been able to do it, you can have all kinds of reasons why it won't happen for you. And you need to be able to follow a community of people who have done it, broken out of it, and do it repeatedly. And you need that accountability for people to notice your gaps, see your blind spots, and shift out of that, right? Because there have been many, many things that you thought of differently before we stopped, even in this conversation, right? So we've changed your mind in how you see things, even just here on this one message here. So think about what's possible when you work with somebody directly to change that, to change the way you see your child and what's possible, and then how to do that systematically by giving your child the skill set to communicate their emotions safely. If you do that for more than just, a one-way street, hearing me talk, right? If there's a back and forth, if there's troubleshooting, because all systems need troubleshooting. They need individualized, specific support. And that's really, really important because you can't get all of that from a group conversation. So that's why we do both. We do the one-to-one and we do the group support, because accountability happens both in the collective and on the individual level. So that's not typically something that is available in a systematic way to break out of the meltdown cycle in other avenues, and that's why we know for sure what we do works, and that's why we have the success rate we have. So here's what I encourage you to do. I encourage you to consider, if you're ready to break out of that pattern, to decide, do you fit all of these lessons? Are these things that you know you're capable of, right? And if that's the case, then what are you waiting for, right? Why are you waiting any longer to break out of this pattern if you can literally turn it around in under 10 weeks? Start to notice that your child is changing how they handle stress, how they accept the word no, how they notice that plans have changed, and say things like, okay, Mom, when you tell them that they can't go to gymnastics today because it's closed. Or that their friend's birthday party is in direct conflict with grandma's birthday party, right? Or they can't go to the park with their friends because they have an assignment due tonight that they didn't work on consistently, and so there's a lot more work to be done. And so when we think about all of those challenges and all of those needs, being able to see your child roll with that and take it as a complete non-issue, that is absolutely possible for you. And whether or not we are a fit requires a conversation. It requires a conversation. It needs to be a mutual fit. We need to decide that we're the right people to support you. And we need to decide that that the goals you have and where you're stuck is the exact problem that we can solve. And if that's the case, then we'll talk to you about how what we do would work for your particular family and what our priorities would be for your particular family. And if that's not the case, then we'll tell you exactly where you need to go, whether that be working with a general therapist, working with more on a more one-on-one basis, deciding to go read a couple of books, and giving you those particular recommendations, But like I said, if you are ready to break out of this meltdown cycle and to finally put this past in the past, regardless of how many bazillion different things you've tried before you've gotten here, then I encourage you to book a call. Go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk or meganthompsoncoaching.com/teen talk and have a conversation with our team. And we'll tell you exactly what your next steps are to totally shift the game that you're dealing with at home and serve your child to emotional wellness at a much faster rate than what you thought was possible. All right, have a wonderful day. I'll speak to you soon. Bye.